Bible Tune Studio presents.
The wind was relentless. It was not merely weather, it was a presence, a living, breathing malice that hunted the ship across the Adriatic. Waves taller than houses crashed against the hull, burying the bow in tons of water before tossing it skyward again. The sky had turned to steel, an impenetrable ceiling that hid the sun by day and the stars by night. Sailors screamed over the roar, trying to hold the ropes, trying to steady the vessel. These were men who knew the sea. They knew her moods. They knew her seasons. But this was different. This was the Euroclydon, the northeaster. A hurricane trapped in a box, spinning violently, refusing to let go. And in the middle of it all, Paul stood calm, steady, a voice of reason in the chaos. He watched the panic. He felt the vibration of the ship threatening to tear itself apart. He saw the Roman centurion, a man of war, paralyzed by an enemy he could not stab with a sword.
When everything breaks apart, faith holds people together.
To understand the terror of the end, we must understand the confidence of the beginning. The journey began with promise. The ship had left Crete, loaded with prisoners, soldiers, merchants, and Paul headed for Rome. This was no small fishing boat. This was an Alexandrian grain ship, the supertanker of the ancient world. It was a massive vessel, designed to haul wheat from Egypt to feed the hungry belly of the Roman Empire.
This is the story of Paul's shipwreck. Faith in the storm.
The journey promised safety and purpose. For the captain, it meant profit. For the centurion Julius, it meant duty. For Paul, it meant destiny. He had appealed to Caesar, and to Caesar he would go. But nature has a way of humbling human plans. The season was late. It was after the fast, the Day of Atonement. In the ancient maritime world, sailing the Mediterranean after October was considered madness. The winter winds were unpredictable. The seas were hungry.
They had docked at Fair Havens. It was a poor harbor, exposed to the elements. Paul, though a prisoner, was a seasoned traveler. He had survived 3 shipwrecks before this. He felt the change in the air pressure. He knew the smell of danger. He warned them.
Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo, and to our own lives also.
But the centurion, Julius, looked at the prisoner, and then he looked at the expert. Who do you listen to? The preacher or the professional? The mystic or the navigator? Julius made a calculation. He trusted the expert. They decided to make a run for it, just a short hop, 40 miles to a better harbor called Phoenix, to winter there. At first, it looked like they were right. A gentle south wind sprang up. They weighed anchor, confident, perhaps even laughing at Paul's pessimism. They hugged the coast of Crete, sailing close to shore. They were in control. The technology of Rome, the skill of the sailors, the calmness of the sea, it all whispered that they were safe. But comfort is often a trap. Suddenly, the weather turned. It wasn't a gradual shift. It was an assault. A wind of hurricane force swept down from the island. It caught the ship and spun it violently. They couldn't head into the wind. The massive vessel became a toy in the hands of a giant. They gave way to it and were driven along. Now, every plank groaned under the storm's fury. Sailors had done everything they could. They passed under the lee of a small island called Cauda, barely managing to secure the lifeboat. Desperation set in. They used ropes to frap the vessel, passing thick cables under the hull and tightening them on deck, literally tying the ship together to keep it from snapping in half. They lowered the sea anchor, a drag to slow them down, terrified they would be driven onto the Syrtis sands off the coast of Africa, a graveyard for ships. Night fell, but darkness offered no relief. The waves battered the ship's sides, breaking the timbers, washing over decks, carrying away hope. Soldiers were tense. These were men trained for the phalanx, for the sword, for the solid earth. They could fight men,
They could not fight the ocean. Prisoners whispered, gripping chains, unsure if the next wave would be their last. Sailors prayed silently or cursed loudly. Fear made them reckless, and recklessness made the storm deadlier. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. The grain, the equipment, the profits, it all went into the sea. Days turned into nights, and nights into days, but they couldn't tell the difference. Neither sun nor stars appeared for many days. In the ancient world, without stars, you are blind. You don't know where you are. You don't know where you are going. All hope that they would be saved was finally given up. Hunger gnawed at them. They hadn't eaten in 2 weeks. Nausea and terror had taken their appetites. The smell of fear was as strong as the smell of brine. They were waiting to die. And then Paul stood up. His sandals were soaked, his robe plastered to his skin. He did not scream. He did not panic. He simply spoke.
Men, you should have listened to me and not set sail from Crete. Then we would have avoided this suffering.
The soldiers glared at him. They hated being reminded that the calm voice they ignored now might be the only thing keeping them alive. It's hard to hear "I told you so" when you're staring at death. But Paul wasn't trying to shame them. He was establishing the truth, so they would listen to what came next.
But now I urge you to keep up your courage. Because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed.
Imagine hearing that. The ship is breaking apart. The sky is black. And a prisoner tells you that you will live, but the ship will die. Paul's words were practical, but they carried another weight. They carried faith.
Last night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, "Not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you."
Paul had been warned in a vision. At the time, the words were comforting, almost impossible to imagine. How could anyone survive this? But notice what Paul said. He didn't just say, "God spoke to me." He said, "The God to whom I belong." In the chaos, Paul knew who owned him. He was not a victim of the storm. He was a servant of God.
So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on the island.
Some laughed nervously, some cursed, some wept. The waves did not pause for laughter, curses, or tears. The storm was indifferent. All through the night, the ship struggled. Water poured in faster than it could be bailed out. The sailors tried to cut ropes, throw cargo into the sea, and steer against the waves. Every decision carried the risk of disaster. And yet, Paul's calm was a tether. His faith anchored the hearts of those who could hear it over the storm. When the 14th night came, the storm had not relented, but the sailors, their ears tuned to the rhythm of the ocean, heard something. Breakers, land. They were driven across the Adriatic, and now they were rushing towards something hard in the dark. They dropped a sounding line, 120 feet. A little later, 90 feet. The bottom was coming up to meet them. If they hit rocks in the dark, the ship would shatter instantly, and they would all drown in the black water. Panic surged. They dropped 4 anchors from the stern to drag the ship to a halt, and they prayed for daylight. But fear makes men selfish. The sailors, the experts, decided to save themselves. Under the pretense of lowering anchors from the bow, they began to lower the lifeboat. They were going to abandon the soldiers, the merchants, and the prisoners to the mercy of the sea. Paul saw it.
Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved.
The soldiers finally believed him. They cut the ropes of the lifeboat and let it drift away. Think about that moment. They destroyed their own escape pod. They burned their bridge. There was no way out now but through the storm, together. Hours passed. The sun barely rose, filtered through gray clouds. Paul spoke again, louder this time, to be heard over the wind.
Today is the 14th night we have been driven across the Adriatic. You have been in suspense and have gone without food. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Don't lose hope. I have faith in God Durance. He has promised that we will not lose our lives. Only the ship. Not a hair of your head will perish.
Some sailors looked at him incredulously. Others felt a quiet reassurance, a strange warmth in the midst of the cold, salty terror. There were 276 of them, and encouraged by one man's faith, they all ate. Then, with new strength, they did the unthinkable. They threw the rest of the grain overboard. They lightened the ship for the final run. When morning came, the storm had not relented. They didn't recognize the land, but they saw a bay with a beach. The sailors debated, should they try to beach the ship or ride it out? The currents and reefs nearby threatened to tear it apart. Every choice was death or near death. They decided to go for it. They cut the anchors. They loosened the ropes holding the rudders. They hoisted the foresail to the wind and aimed for the beach. The ship became a spear, thrown by the storm at the land. And then the ship struck the sandbanks. The bow began to break apart. The mast snapped under the wind. Water poured in, threatening to crush them. Panic surged. The soldiers, following standard Roman protocol, drew their swords. If a prisoner escaped, the guard forfeited his own life. They planned to kill them all, including Paul. But the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life. He kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. The rest were to get there on planks or on other pieces of the ship.
Keep up courage! You will stand up, all of you!
The soldiers took charge of the prisoners, making them jump into the water with whatever debris could float them. Sailors helped one another, guiding men to shore. And slowly, one by one, battered, exhausted, drenched, they reached land. They counted heads, 10, 50, 100, 200, 276. Not a life was lost. The storm had destroyed the ship, but it had not destroyed them. When the wind finally died down and the sun broke through the clouds, the survivors looked around. They were stranded on an island, bruised, cold, and exhausted, but alive. Some knelt in the sand, thanking God. Some simply stared at the horizon, trying to grasp the reality of survival.
The message survives the storm.
Weeks later, the shipwreck would be forgotten by the ocean. Time would erode the memory of splintered timbers and drifting sails. The grain was lost. The money was lost. The ship was lost. But the story of courage, faith, and survival would ripple through the early church. Letters would be written. Accounts would be told. Lives would be touched. And the world would never be the same. Because Paul's faith in the storm had held people together, even when the storm seemed stronger than any man could endure. It was not showy. It was not heroic in the way soldiers often define heroism. It was not about controlling the storm. It was about trusting the one who controls the storm. Paul didn't promise them an easy journey. He didn't promise them the ship would be saved. He promised them life. Sometimes everything we rely on, our ships, our plans, our expertise, has to break apart so we can see what truly holds us up. And in the end, the anchor held, and it was enough. If Paul's courage in the storm speaks to your heart, help us share this message of faith with the world. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps Bible Tunes Studio bring powerful biblical stories to life through cinematic, faith-strengthening animations. Together, we can remind the world that even when the ship breaks apart, God's promise still stands.